Welcome to EtherLink AI Insights. I'm Alex, and today we're diving into something that's reshaping enterprise AI in Europe, Agentic AI and Multi-Agent Orchestration. Our co-host Sam is here, and we're exploring Utrecht's AI Lead Architecture Guide, which breaks down how organizations can actually build and deploy autonomous AI agents while staying compliant with the EU AI Act in 2026. Sam, this feels like a pivotal moment for AI in business.
Absolutely, Alex. What struck me most is that this isn't theoretical anymore. Gartner's data shows 75% of enterprises plan to deploy autonomous agents by 2026. That's a massive shift from where we were even 2 years ago. We're talking about moving beyond chatbots to intelligent systems that can reason, plan, and integrate with real business tools. But here's the tension. Europe's regulatory landscape is tightening simultaneously.
Right, so we're not just building smarter agents, we're building them in a compliance-first environment. Let's unpack what agentic AI actually means in this context. When we say autonomous reasoning and planning capabilities, what does that look like in a real business scenario?
Think about invoice processing. A traditional system might flag ambiguous entries for human review. An agentic system analyzes the invoice, cross-references supplier databases, checks payment history, adjusts for seasonal variance, and decides whether to approve, request clarification, or escalate, all without waiting for explicit human instruction at each step. It learns from outcomes and refines its logic. That iterative refinement is what separates agentic systems from static AI tools.
And the business case is compelling. McKinsey projects $2.3 trillion in value creation across European enterprises by 2028 from autonomous agents. But Sam, you mentioned safety guardrails. How do we keep these systems from going rogue?
That's where the EU AI Act becomes strategic rather than burdensome. High-risk systems, those handling financial decisions, hiring, healthcare, or critical infrastructure, require mandatory impact assessments, bias audits, transparent documentation, and continuous monitoring. It sounds like compliance overhead, but it actually forces better architecture from day one. Organizations embedding governance up front see faster deployments because they're not retrofitting controls later.
So compliance becomes a feature, not a bug. The data backs that up. Gemini found 62% of European enterprises lack documented governance frameworks for production AI. That's a gap, but it's also an opportunity for Utrecht-based organizations to jump ahead. How does that translate into actual architectural advantage?
Enter agent mesh architecture. It's borrowed from service mesh patterns, where you have specialized agents handling distinct domains, one for document processing, another for compliance review, a third for scheduling, all coordinated by a central orchestration layer. This design makes governance auditable and scalable. You can swap or update individual agents without destabilizing the whole system, and you have clear accountability for each agent's decisions.
So instead of one monolithic AI system making all decisions, you have specialized experts collaborating. That sounds like it would reduce risk and make debugging easier. But how do you actually coordinate them efficiently? There's got to be a communication overhead.
The orchestration layer manages that elegantly. When one agent completes its task, it passes context to the next agent in the workflow. The coordinator also handles conflict resolution. If two agents recommend different actions, the orchestrator either escalates to human judgment or applies predefined rules. The key insight from the guide is that this reduces operational costs by 30–45% in repetitive, knowledge-intensive tasks while maintaining transparency for auditors and regulators.
That cost reduction is significant. Let's talk timeline. We're roughly 18 months from 2026 when EU AI Act enforcement intensifies. What's the realistic roadmap for organizations just starting to think about this?
The guide identifies that 18-month window as a competitive advantage. If you're establishing governance and AI lead architecture now, you're ahead of reactive peers scrambling to comply in 2026. First step, audit your current AI systems. Which are high risk? Which handle sensitive data or decisions? Then design governance frameworks, impact assessments, bias testing protocols, monitoring dashboards. Third, prototype your agent mesh with non-critical workflows to learn what works in your environment.
So it's audit, design, then experiment. That's prudent. But I'm curious about the practical evaluation frameworks mentioned in the guide. How do you measure whether your multi-agent system is actually working?
Great question. You're tracking multiple dimensions: accuracy and bias metrics for each agent, end-to-end workflow performance, human appeal rates, and compliance audit readiness. For invoice processing, that might be, did the agent approve when it should? Were there disparities by supplier type that signal bias? How often did humans override decisions, and why? Can you reconstruct the reasoning for any decision if an auditor asks? Those metrics become your governance evidence.
That documentation piece is critical for compliance. Let's shift to cost optimization. The guide mentions strategies for managing multi-agent deployment at scale. What's the biggest pitfall organizations encounter?
Many teams over-engineer initially, deploying too many agents, using expensive model calls for tasks that could run on lightweight rules, or failing to cache responses across similar requests. The guide advocates for starting lean. Identify your highest impact use case, build the minimal agent mesh for that workflow, measure results, then expand. You're optimizing for value per compute dollar, not maximum capability. That discipline keeps budgets predictable and proves ROI before scaling.
Smart. So you're iterating with intent rather than trying to boil the ocean. One more thing strikes me. Utrecht specifically is emerging as an AI hub. Why is that relevant to organizations in other European cities or countries?
Utrecht's becoming a nexus for responsible AI development, partly because of proximity to regulatory bodies and strong academic partnerships. The patterns documented there: governance-first design, transparent agent architectures, compliance integration, translate across Europe. If your organization is London, Berlin, or Paris, these principles apply. The EU AI Act is uniform across member states. Organizations in Utrecht are essentially piloting best practices that benefit the entire continent.
So we're really talking about a blueprint for responsible agentic AI deployment across Europe. If someone's listening and thinking, okay, this matters for my organization, where should they actually start?
3 concrete steps. First, inventory your current AI systems and categorize by risk level using the EU AI Act framework. This takes a week for most organizations. Second, define your highest value agentic workflow, something that's repetitive, costly, and low risk to experiment with. Third, read the full guide on etherlink.ai, download their agent mesh architecture template, and run a 3-month pilot. By then, you'll have concrete data on whether autonomous agents are right for your operations, and you'll have documented governance that positions you ahead of competitors still figuring this out.
Excellent, actionable advice. To our listeners, this is a moment where early movers in agentic AI gain substantial competitive advantage, not through reckless deployment, but through thoughtful, compliant architecture. For the full deep dive into Utrecht's AI lead architecture, case studies, cost optimization strategies, and production deployment patterns, head over to etherlink.ai. You'll find the complete guide there. Sam, thanks for walking through this with us today.
My pleasure, Alex. The key takeaway: agentic AI is inevitable in 2026, but compliance and smart architecture separate leaders from laggards. Organizations that treat the EU AI Act as a competitive advantage rather than a constraint will dominate. Thanks everyone for listening to EtherLink AI Insights.